Thank you for your patience, and you're recognized for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for letting me wave on, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate it. It's a bipartisan policy this committee's had for some time, and allows us to get into issues that we consider important, even if we're not on the subcommittee, if we are on the full committee. So I do appreciate it. Mr. Sunday, I have appreciated your perspective today and in your testimony on how we can leverage our historical leadership in energy and industry to continue leading the world in clean and affordable electricity. On page 9 of your testimony, you state that the cost of triggering NSR, new source review, has caused companies in your state to cancel projects that would have reduced emissions, lowered operating costs, and improved public health and our environment. I always like to describe this as forcing a company to swallow the apple whole. Whereas if we take bites, or if we allow the company to take bites out of that apple, they would be able to consume the apple. In other words, get the improvements that needed out there. But if they're forced because of NSR to take it all in at one time, then they just don't do it. Do you agree with that assessment or analysis?
Yes, I do. It's certainly an obstacle to enhancing the operations of domestic facilities and getting cleaner. It's a very perverse regulatory approach that discourages cleaner operations from our facilities.
And in fact, I will tell you that, and I've said this before in committee and other contexts, that whether they could get around it or not, I have a furniture manufacturing facility in my district that now has a conveyor belt to nowhere. It goes out, I don't know, 75, 50, 75, 100 yards and comes back because at one time part of their paint process was at the other end of the conveyor belt, but they've been advised by their attorneys because of NSR not to take that conveyor belt out, because then that would trigger the entire set of the Clean Air Act rules coming down on their heads. And they're like, okay, it costs us a couple of seconds in manufacturing of each piece of furniture that we do, case goods. But even though we're fighting every second to get it better, to compete with the Chinese, we can't afford to suddenly have all these new rules placed on us at one time. Do you have similar stories, or have you heard stories like that as well?
Yeah, it comes up in a number of contexts. Maybe you come out of an economic recession and your factory wants to run more. NSR is going to hit you if your emissions, if you're going to make a significant modification. In other circumstances, maybe you want to add another shift, and NSR again comes into play. As you mentioned, it discourages efficiency improvements. And as you know, we've had the opportunity at the chamber to come down in front of this committee in the past and talk about your potential solutions, other ways to make NSR better. Whatever we want to make in this country, whether it's solar panels, telecommunications assets, et cetera, NSR reform has got to be on the table if we're going to talk about competitiveness.
And I appreciate that. And people need to remember that NSR is just one piece of the complicated Clean Air Act regulatory puzzle, and providing much needed clarity to this complex program does not take away from other provisions under the Clean Air Act. And it's clear that providing greater certainty through common sense targeted reforms will replace some of the ambiguity and confusion surrounding NSR and result in a more effective and efficient program. And you mentioned that I have legislation, and I do, the NSR Improvement Act, and it would do that. But there's nothing in the Clean Future Act or the Climate Leadership and Environmental Action for Our Nation's Future Act. There's nothing in there that deals with NSR reform, is there?
No, sir.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Would adopting an hourly emissions rate test like the one used in the EPA's New Source Performance Standard program enhance the New Source Review, or NSR program, so that companies can update their facilities and install technologies like carbon capture? Would that be helpful?
Yes, and that's a solution we've endorsed in the past.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And in fact, as you may recall, the language that was in the underlying bills that started the NSR and started the New Source Performance Standard, that language is virtually identical, but because of interpretations in different divisions of the EPA, we have completely different applications. Is that not your understanding as well?
Yeah, it really depends on the regional office.
Yeah. And that makes it hard for businesses to make decisions, does it not?
Yeah, or at least causes certain parts of the country to lose out on investment.
And that investment would make the air cleaner, correct?
Correct. Again, we can't just put blinders on and pretend that it's only what's going on in the United States. It's a globally competitive market.
I'm for getting the air cleaner. Let's pass some NSR reform. Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and I believe